Good evening and welcome to I'm Listening Live. We've got a great show planned for you. We have Talinda Bennington as well as Dr. Christine Moutier, and we're going to be talking all things suicide because it is National Suicide Awareness Month and we're coming up on National Suicide Awareness Week. Now, for those that feel disconnected from the topic, I want to remind us that we are all part of creating a world in which people want to be present and people feel safe and feel validated and want to exist, or we actively are working against that kind of world. The larger things that do have a tie to politics, which is why I'm telling everyone to make sure they register to vote and to change administration, is things like access to healthcare, which includes mental health care, is really important. Not everyone can afford or has insurance that covers that. Also, just general universal healthcare, also living wages, housing. These are the foundational things that make people more resilient and able to tackle anything that comes down the road afterwards. Now, that's the macro level. What are some things we can do ourselves or with our loved ones on a more micro personal level? Well, first off, focusing on self-care. We talk a lot about that. Building joy and pleasure in our lives. Again, building a life that feels meaningful to you. Also setting boundaries, toxic relationships, pulling yourself out of those, but also listening. Creating the kind of relationship where those around you feel safe talking to you honestly and us talking to them, normalizing the discussion around possibly having struggles. And then finally, just outright asking. It's a healthy, important sign that you care and that you're there to listen if you ask people how their mental health is and you possibly provide resources for them. All right, and now we're going to go to our first guest, Talinda Bennington. Talinda, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We got that heat wave going on, so it's making everything that's already intense just a little bit more stressful.
Yeah, and a bit of a fire, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, this year just doesn't want us off the hook without experiencing literally everything that's possible. So let's check in about that right now. How are you doing mental health-wise in this time of, not just COVID, but a whole lot of different things going on in the world?
I'm just really focusing on my family and myself. Really just taking time to be with each other and enjoy, the time that we have together. And it's doing me a lot of good.
That's beautiful. That's kind of what I'm recommending to the people I'm working with as well in therapy is just kind of focus in on what's close and proximate to you. We're like self-quarantining with family members and friends, just kind of work on the health of that. So talk to us a little bit about parenting during COVID. I know that you have children. What has that been like?
A wide range of everything.
A
little bit like this year, I guess. But, I have to say overall, it's been pretty great. I'm happy that, I get to be with my kids. I'm happy they're not in kindergarten. I don't know how I would do it if they were much younger, but yeah, it's been good. And my kids actually like each other. So that helps too. Yeah. I don't have a lot of the fighting I've been hearing from fellow parents and things like that. So,
that's a
not
gift.
Bragging, but
yeah.
Kind of bragging about my kids.
Well done, as a parent should, because I know right now everything's very amplified. So I'm happy to hear that some people are thriving. I know some people, they struggle to acknowledge that, but you know what? I want to celebrate anyone that's doing well right now because it's definitely a funky time. So it is National Suicide Awareness Month. Really, really important topic to talk about, though, often very difficult in our culture. Do you think we are getting better discussing mental health, specifically things like suicide, or do you think it's something we still have a lot of anxiety around?
Both, actually. Both of those questions ring very true to me. I think that we've made really great strides in being more open about mental health. I see a lot of it, especially in dialogue on TV shows, which is just really great. But, I also think that we still have a long way to go because it's still something very hard to speak about. It's very personal. And that's just going to take time to, really, really fully change our culture of it.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people don't have necessarily familiarity with it, as you said. And so I think media giving us the language or kind of modeling for us what it can look like, because I know it's hard for people to speak up. So I know that your family obviously has been directly impacted. But what would you say to parents who have young children like yourself about talking about mental health and suicide? Do you recommend doing it from birth, a young age? How would you recommend they approach that?
I personally, I mean, and I take what I'm about to tell you is straight from my kids' therapist as well as my own. So I'm just kind of biting what I've learned from her and from both of them, actually. And that's just to, age appropriate, use age appropriate words and terms, and whatever that means for you and your family. I always, applaud professional advice. And with my children, we just talk about with the younger ones, the twins especially, we speak about taking care of our mental health just as like our physical health. It's important to keep speaking about our feelings even when we feel well.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to really just implement in my kids, like these good lifelong habits. So
yeah, I think that's beautiful because
do.
we often don't see mental health issues coming, right? We're not always able to necessarily address it when we need to. So I like what you're saying. We have to address it at all phases of someone's development in life, because unfortunately it's something that can sometimes just feels like it shows up. And, I was looking at a study and I thought this was really powerful. It was saying that people that abuse substances, drugs or alcohol are 6 times more likely to complete suicide. In what ways do you think drugs and alcohol intervene? Because I know for me, I think that in order for us to have really good, resilient, robust mental health, we have to talk about everything. So do you talk to your kids and do you recommend talking about addiction within families?
I do. Yeah, because it changes your brain chemistry. The more chemicals you introduce into your brain. And if you already have a predisposition for depression, which can be genetic, those are things you need to watch out for. I very openly speak with my children about addiction of all types, from what they see kids vaping. We speak about that. We speak about drinking alcohol, what that looks like if mommy has a glass of wine versus somebody falling over drunk. And in our home, it normalizes the conversation. And I think that's important. I really do, because, it's a fact of life. And my kids know that they're going to be of age one day to be able to drink alcohol, to be able to vape if they choose, whatever it is. But I want them to know the consequences of that, and more specifically the consequences and their risks because of the depression, the history of depression, that and bipolar that runs in their family.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I like your use of the word normalize when you were talking about the different ways that alcohol can play a role in our life. I know right now in the time of COVID, I was a little worried as a mental health professional about some of the casualness. People were, using word wise around drinking, people talking about waking up and drinking and COVID martinis and, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. And I thought, it's humorous and it's funny, but we also have to be aware that some people, right, their use of alcohol isn't rooted in self-care or coping. It might be a sign of something worse. So I'm glad we're having that conversation. And it's something I keep putting on my social media is like, check in on your own alcohol or drug use, check in on the drug use of those around you, because not everyone has a family like the one you're talking about where they can be very transparent and talk openly.
Right. I feel that, the openness and the transparency is actually, a gift that Chester has left us with, because what else is there to do besides pretend like it never happened? I mean, that's not going to happen. So our only option is to talk about it. So I hope that helps whoever's listening, if they struggle with it, because it's a very uncomfortable topic to speak about with little kids. But there are a lot of books out there. There's professional care. There's help out there, teachers, resources to help you kind of navigate these tougher conversations with your kids.
Yeah. Because even with social media and just the larger world, just because you might not be talking to your kids about something, they are hearing conversations around these things in songs, movies. And, I think some parents worry that to talk about drugs, alcohol, safer sex practices, suicide, that it's kind of giving them permission or supporting it, but I always see it as the opposite. You're giving them the language to talk about it. You're giving them space to practice talking about it. You're getting them familiar with these things. And I think that can really, really build resilience.
Yeah. I mean, I like to say you're giving them the power of their own self-judgment, self-reflection, self-confidence. If you empower your kids to make their own choices, wise choices, then you've done your job.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people that are parents or other people in positions of power or that children, individuals look up to, for them to talk about their mental health struggles. Because I think culturally there's still a stigma or still this idea that only people that aren't competent or successful or thriving have mental health issues. But some people hide them very well, and they can exist for all of us. And we have to talk about them, especially people like myself who's a therapist or yourself as a parent. So do you talk about your own mental health with your children?
I absolutely do. Yes, 100%. Very open about it. My kids, just last week, I was in some sort of funky mood. And my daughter Lila said, "You need to call your therapist." I was like, you're right. I probably do. It was really funny.
Trained well. God bless her.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the heavier, conversations around this. For those individuals that are listening right now and they might have a family member that's struggling with their mental health, how would you advise them to talk to that individual?
Well, I would, one, approach it from a loving place. Try to, when you use your words, use the words like, "I feel you may not be doing okay," rather than "you aren't doing okay," or come from a place of I and your caring concern, and just ask, "How are you feeling? Is there anything I can do to support you?" And just keep with it if you don't feel comfortable with the first answer. But I think it's really important that we're aware of our words, and we try to not use the words should, shouldn't, when we speak to others, especially about, feelings and mental health and those sort of things.
Yeah.
Because it can lead to defensiveness.
That's right. And I love the tone and the word choice you used, because it felt like it had a lot of care in it, and people that are struggling often can have some shame or guilt around that. We're in a culture where everyone's all about the silver lining and positive thinking, and that's not honest or real for everyone, right? And so we have to be non-judgmental and really caring and sitting in those darkness. And unfortunately for those families who might have had someone who has, died by suicide, what would you say to them?
I would just say, find your support, whether that's with family or friends. Find the support within yourself. That's self-care. Try to get professional help, because it's such a huge, hard pathway in life, and to be able to try to cope with all of that on your own, as well as take care of yourself and whatever else you have to do in your life, can really be overwhelming, to say the least. So, I guess my biggest takeaway from that is just to find your support wherever that lies, and stick with that.
And just be on your journey. I think sometimes for someone who maybe is a parent or even a boss, they feel like they have to pull it together sooner or be better. And I always lovingly just remind people, go through your process, mourn, let it come up as it comes up, because I think we can complicate that bereavement or that mourning if people are made to feel guilty about that healthy process.
Right. Yeah, I that's interesting to say that. I actually was set to do an interview with the amazing Dr. Ashton this week, and it was causing me so much anxiety to think about being on air. And I'm pretty close with her, and we've shared a lot, and it was just, I don't know what it was, but I had to cancel, and I said it's causing me too much anxiety. It's not good for me, and I think being able to say that and verbalize that and that be okay. That's really important too, because to try to press on through something where you're having a tough time or it's causing you anxiety and not anything positive, and it's okay to say no. It's okay to set boundaries, and that's important.
I love that you just said that. I love that you do that. I love that you did that. I think that's really hard for people in our culture. You know, a lot of my clients struggle to take their mental health or someone else's mental health seriously. And I love that. It's an interview. Your mental health means more than an interview. And we have to get better about setting those boundaries. But it's hard for people to honor them. And I think that's the difficulty. We have to set those boundaries, we have to hold those boundaries. But I love that. Yeah, your mental health matters. If you had an injury, a physical injury, you hurt your leg, you hurt your arm, people would understand. But mental health, people really struggle to support that.
Yeah. And I knew that, Dr. Ashton would understand 110%, the whole team would. And I felt that was safe. But, like if I think about that, if I had to say that to someone I didn't know, like that would have been much harder. I would have definitely done it. I've learned how to set my boundaries a long time ago to protect myself. But it just helps me, it just makes me more at peace and able to be a better version of myself.
Yeah. And I love you modeling that for your children. I'd rather you disappoint a friend or a loved one in prioritizing your mental health. I mean, we really have to start to do that. Let's talk just very quickly about music and mental health, music and suicide prevention. How do you think that those intersect? Because I love the concept of using music to help us with our moods.
Right. Yeah, I think my guess is from the beginning of time when it was created, that's what it's been there for. There's so many different types, and the tones and melodies can really take you on an emotional journey. So, I'm really sad we can't have in-person concerts. I know that was a source of healing for a lot of people, but I think the artists are doing a great job at trying to be present for the fans virtually as much as they can. And hopefully soon we'll be able to get back and see them again and kind of like be immersed in that to help us along.
Yeah. It's good for our mood. It's also so important because we have community through the bands we love and the shows we go to. I know as a teenager, that was where I made my friends, going to live shows. It's such an important part of our social life, our identity, but like you said, our mental health.
Yeah, I agree.
And before we let you go, I want to hear just about the campaign for National Suicide Prevention Week, the hashtag Keep Going. Can you tell us about that?
It's just to keep going, just to keep doing what you need to do to live each day the best that you can, to feel good to the best of your ability. And if you don't feel good that day, that's fine. Just keep going and make it to the next.
Beautifully said. Talinda Bennington, thank you so much for being a part of our show. And as always, thank you for all the powerful work you're out there doing.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Take care. Be well. Have a good night.
Okay. Thanks. You too. Bye.
All right. That was really beautiful. I always love Talinda's vulnerability. And I think a lot of important perspectives came out of that. Look, the more you build an environment with everyone you encounter and those around you where we can have open, honest dialogues about mental health is a really, really valuable way to get people feeling safe talking about it. And that's one of the number one things that we have to remember is that people struggle sometimes silently, and it's not always something we can see. People can be very high functioning and still dealing with some suicidal thoughts or some issues around drug and alcohol use or other mental health concerns. Now let's go to our next guest, Dr. Christine Moutier. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So it's National Suicide Awareness Month. So of course we're talking about this topic, which is really, really important. So, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do here at I'm Listening is get people familiar talking about this, hearing others talk about this. So when we're dealing with suicidality, what are the things that we want to be thoughtful about in terms of those that we love in our lives?
I think the first thing is to realize that people are struggling all around us, and we all struggle at different times, and that's normal, that's human. And the other thing about that, though, is that we tend to keep it pretty locked up. And so if you're noticing signs of distress or even just signs that they don't seem like they're quite their normal self, that could be an indication that it's just the tip of the iceberg and that it's time to have a really supportive, caring conversation and really, again, like listen to what is happening in their life and tell them that you just want to understand so that you can support them more, that there's no judgment. You want to really be aware that that layer of shame is there for all of us at different times. So we have to kind of break through that.
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, and that's the powerful micro part. And I think tying into that on the macro, I want everyone to get more familiar just talking about their mental health. I know that even as mental health professionals or as a parent or a boss, it's really hard for us to sometimes speak about our vulnerability, worried that maybe we won't be seen as competent.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. This is where I think the biggest culture shift is happening. And COVID is actually facilitating this to some extent, because who isn't struggling with something because your life has been shifted around, if not turned upside down during this pandemic? And so it's important for everyone to realize that it is human to have a range of emotions, a range of challenges and mental health kind of experiences that you'll have, changes in your sleep, changes in your mood, anxiety. Some of us, many of us experience trauma, and that has an impact on not just our sort of our sense of things, but it actually has an impact on our physiology. And these are all things that we can work through, but we have to talk about it as the first step. So I love that you're normalizing that conversation and these experiences for all of us. They're just simply human.
Yeah, and that's why whenever I interview a celebrity on the show, it's one of the questions I always ask them is, how's your mental health? Right? Which is just a way to normalize that even these wealthy, famous people are struggling, depressed, anxious.
Every person is a human being, no matter what their, fancy titles, education, pedigree. It doesn't matter. We are at the core of it. We're human. We have our physical health and we have our mental health and other things too. Of course, our social health and spiritual health, and all of those things live on a continuum, but we can shape it in some ways. Genetics is not our destiny, as is the case for physical health. Same is true for mental health.
And what would you recommend? What are some of the things that you believe people can do to build up this buzzword we love right now, resilience?
Yes. I mean, I think it is a matter of knowing yourself and actually starting to pay attention to sort of how you tick. What are the things that fill up our resilience sort of coping reservoir, if you will? I think of like a tank of fuel that we're constantly drawing from. And what are the things that actually fill it up? There are people who are sometimes toxic influences and others who are very supportive influences. And other things, activities, you can decide what are the times, what is the type of music, breathing exercises, what's the type of exercise that I tend to get the most out of. It's so, your physical health does link up with your mental health as well. So those are all things that you can kind of reflect on and just take little steps. We're not aiming for perfection. That is not really attainable anyway. So it's just progress, not perfection.
And let's talk quickly about social media. I think that that's a big influence on our mental health. One of the things I keep talking about over and over is community care, collectivity, thinking about the impact you're having on others. So how does social media play into that, considering all the trolling, the bullying?
I think it's one of those things that goes into that bucket of know yourself and figure out how do you dial things up towards a better state of well-being and stability. And there are probably many of us that social media will tend to kind of be all-consuming and all absorbing unless we set certain parameters or we think about, do I need to actually unplug or block certain people or sites because they're not good for our resilience and our sense of well-being. I mean, it can go the other way too, where you can seek out those influences on social media who are really encouraging and join those communities. kind of shapes your sense of not only the world you're living in, but also who you are. I mean, it's really very important. In addition to like our IRL, our real life relationships, we can have some influence over how those goes, and it's the same thing on social media.
I love that. Just checking in with yourself. How do I feel when I'm looking at someone's page that I'm following? How do I feel after I've been on my social media? And if you feel bad, unfollow some of that stuff. And then quickly, before I let you go, one of the stats I was looking at was talking about the higher rate of suicide with people that are male identified. What do you make of that stat?
Well, that's been a long-standing true thing about suicide rates and the differences between different demographic groups. So the deal is that none of us are immune from suicide risk. So we all need to take care of ourselves and again, shore up our resilience and really our protective factors. But, when you think about the way males, men, boys and men are socialized in most cultures, certainly including most in America, there's I think, a very unrealistic expectation of being stoic, and that equates to being strong. And when you talk to your next male celebrity or athlete, especially one who's been well practiced or in therapy, they're going to tell you that they actually are having better success in their relationships if they're an athlete on the field when they are taking care of their mental health. So it turns out that men and women really benefit from processing our experiences, and especially if we've experienced trauma or any just charged up emotions, we're going to have a better outcome if we process those. So, there's a whole lot there about the gender difference with suicide. Part of it is also access to lethal means and impulsivity, and so there are some differences between the genders, but certainly I think what we can be doing is all of us contributing to improvements and progression in our culture, where men are also encouraged to talk and to be reminded that that is actually something that they're going to benefit from, and their loved ones, their significant others, are going to find very attractive. So it's kind of like we were told a lie about toxic masculinity. That's being a good thing.
Yep, it heals us all to do that work of moving away from it. Dr. Christine Moutier, thank you so much for your time and for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Have a beautiful night.
Care.
Part of mental health and us getting to our level of resilience that's needed is getting away from the idea that talking about your feelings makes you soft or fragile. In fact, it's one of the most empowered things we can do. If you need some more support, we're going to have some resources that we're going to throw up at the end of the show. As always, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week at 5 p.m. Pacific. That's 8 p.m. Eastern on all the radio.com handles. Thanks for hanging out with me, and you all have a beautiful, beautiful night.